Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. King's Landing 2098 AC. Jaehaerys Targaryen. He moved into the room and looked on as Oberyn's spear moved through the air. Ned and Arthur stood fighting two guards as Jay headed for Illyrio, Aegon, and their guard. Jay hadn't even got more than a few steps when, to his surprise, Illyrio stabbed his guard in the neck and then moved away, leaving him face to face with Aegon. Before he had time to process it, Aegon had already drawn Blackfire, and it and Dark Sister had begun to sing their song. Aegon was clearly trained, but whoever had done so had done a poor job. Or maybe it was a lack of talent in the student. Either way, within a couple of clashes of the blades, Jay felt he had this battle won, even shaking off the thought that just like the mummery Aegon was performing and claiming to be his brother, his lack of skills may be won also. Dodging a strike and seeing his Uncle Ned on the ground, he decided to end this quickly and help wherever it was needed. With a dodge and a feint, he moved inside of Aegon's defense, and raising Dark Sister, he crashed the hilt of the blade against the silver mask. The mummer wore, Aegon crumbled to the ground, and upon quickly glancing around, Jay could see that Arthur and both his uncles were unharmed. He tried to get the boy to see sense, but it was clear it was an impossible task. And the next thing he knew, there was green fire everywhere. A voice in his head called out and said blood was the key. And so he once again opened the wound in his hand and watched as the fire went out. Looking down to the ground, in his confusion, he saw a girl leaning down over Aegon's unconscious form. Jay checked his armor and could see that the coloring had been burned away, and yet the armor itself seemed intact, other than some misshaping and melting, which would need to be worked on. He hadn't actually even felt the fire as it swept over him. There was no heat from it, and it hadn't seemed to have done any damage to him at all. Turning briefly from the girl and Aegon, he could see that his uncles and Arthur were concerned, and knew he had to put them at ease before he found out who this girl was. "I am unhurt," he said simply before moving towards Aegon and the girl. The girl had dark hair and gaunt features. She seemed no more than 7 and 10, and yet Jane felt she was far older than that. A brief image of a girl standing where Illyrio had been a few moments came to him. Something he was sure he'd seen from the corner of his eye as he had faced Aegon. Looking now at the girl, he saw she was wearing Illyrio's clothes, the Magister's robes hanging loosely on her far too thin, for them anyway, body. "Who are you?" he asked. "A friend," the girl said, standing up. "Your name?" he said irritably. "No one," the girl said, and he heard Arthur and Oberyn move closer. "She's a faceless man, your grace," Arthur said, and Jay felt his fingers tighten around Dark Sister. "Why are you here?" he asked, and the girl looked at him. "Valar Dohaeris," she said simply. "Serve ho?" Oberyn asked, and the girl still looked at him, her eyes never leaving his own. "The prince that was promised," she said, catching him by surprise. "I don't—" "What?" he said, as the girl stood up. "My work here is done, my prince. You'll find the fat man's body in the wall in the Tower of the Hand. His sellswords have left. I believe you're dealing with his Unsullied. You may need this," she said, holding out a whip which, as Jay moved to take it from her, Oberyn stepped in and allowed the girl to give it to him instead. "We can't just let her leave, your grace. She's an assassin," his Uncle Ned said, and Jay turned to look at him. "Who apparently has helped us, uncle, greatly, if what she says is true. And the sellswords are gone." His uncle looked shocked, though whether that was because of the girl in front of them or what he had seen just moments before was hard to say. "Valar Morghulis," Jay said to the girl, and caught the little smirk on her face. "Valar Dohaeris, my prince. Those in the order wish you well, and you'll face no trouble from any who serve the many-faced god," the girl said, and Jay watched as she walked through a door and was gone, so quickly it was as if she'd not been there at all. He bent down and picked Blackfire up. It truly was the sword of kings, and though a part of him would love nothing more than to wield it and show it for the symbol it was, it felt wrong in his hands. Holding it, he turned to look to the others. Arthur seemed proud to see him hold both his family's swords, and Oberyn looking at him with a smirk on his face. "Is it safe letting her leave, your grace?" Arthur asked. "I don't know much about the House of Black and White, Arthur, but I'd prefer them with me than against me. The girl came here and did a job. I'll not mourn Illyrio, nor seek to punish the person who killed him. I'm not that much of a hypocrite." he said, seeing the different reactions his uncles had to his words, Ned frowning and Oberyn nodding approvingly. Now what? Oberyn asked. We need men inside the city. Our men, and I need to let the people know below that it's done. First things first, we need more of our men here, and I need to speak to my aunt, uncle. You know where Dany is. Can you take this to her? He said, handing Oberyn the whip. I'll see it done, nephew. Uncle, can you go with him? Once you have my aunt and the wildfire is secure, seek to bring in your men. Speak to the gold cloaks. If the sellswords are truly gone, I doubt they'll wish to fight. Rhaenys will join you just to bring home the point. He asked, looking to his Uncle Ned. Aye, what will you do? Ned asked. I'll let those below know, and once we have our men inside, then we can begin to get rid of the damn wildfire, he said. He looked to Arthur and nodded to Aegon, watching as the knight dragged him away and began to tie him to a pillar. JJ then walked to the steps in front of the throne and took a seat, reaching out to those below and trying not to imagine what the reaction would be when 6 cats began to make noises at the same time. They still needed men to stay with the wildfire, and he hoped the orders he gave would be followed precisely. Half the men were to stay below and half would come to him, and once they did, he could then begin bringing order to the city. Behind him, the Iron Throne loomed large, and he saw Arthur looking from it to him more than once, Jay smiling at the thoughts of what the knight wished to see. While it would make an interesting image for anyone who came into the room, he had sworn to himself he'd not sit it until he was coronated, something he dearly wished to keep to. You'll truly not sit it, Arthur said, walking to sit beside him. I'd not tempt fate, Arthur. Let's see the city secured. See the wildfire removed, and then I'll take my throne, he said, and Arthur nodded. It was the Great Jon and Sir Richard who came up first. The large Umber Lord looking around the room, almost disappointed there was no one left to fight, or perhaps that there was not more carnage in the room, showing there had been a greater one held here without him. Sir Richard walked to him with an eager look on his face, and Jade smiled at him and nodded. We've taken the caches, Sir Richard. My aunt has the Unsullied stood down for now, and my uncles are gone to bring the army in to bring order to the city, he said. The gold cloaks. Their commander is ours, your grace. I'll go meet with him and bring them to our side. Truly, he asked, and Richard nodded. See it done. Be safe, Richard, he said as Richard hurried from the room. Devos and Jorah arrived, followed by Tiain and Sir Richard Horp, Arthur visibly relaxing as there were now 3 Kingsguard in the room. Jay looked to Devos and was glad to see that it was just a small knock the man had taken, and soon the others began to come in, also Sandor and Ardos arriving next. When Randall Tarley arrived limping with Ser Partek, Jay had wanted to send for the Grand Maester, and was glad he was able to when Ser Richard arrived back with Jaxleen, Bywater, and some gold cloaks. The commander quickly kneeling and telling him the city watch had stood down and were now his. Sir Richard, see that Lord Tarley is seen to by the Graniser, Jack said as finally Jaime and Walder arrived. At once, your grace, Sir Richard said as Jay looked to see Jaime smiling upon noticing that it was finished and he'd not been harmed. All is well, your grace, Jaime asked as he walked towards him. As well as can be expected, Lord Hand, he said, smiling. It took another few hours for the Northern and Dornish armies to enter, Jayo walking to the window and looking out at the city below. Once they were in the city and Dunnan finally arrived, Jay turned to everyone in the throne room. We need to march to the Septa, my lords. It's the largest space, and the people of the city need to know that we're in control now. Sir Richard, can you make arrangements at the Sept itself and speak to your lips about what we discussed? I can, your grace, Sir Richard said, and was then gone in the blink of an eye. Lord Stark, I leave the prisoners under your watch. See that they're treated fairly, he said to his uncle, seeing him nod before moving from the room, the Great Jon following behind him. Prince Oberyn, the wildfire, can you see that the men and women guarding it are relieved? I'd also like to have you and my cousins with me at the Septa. I'll see it done, your grace. He walked over to Dany and whispered in her ear, his aunt smiling as she went to fetch the rest of their family. It was long past time. The realm knew that he was not the only dragon in Westeros. Looking to Jaime, he motioned for him to come over, his hand, his father by choice, standing with him as they looked out on the city below. Thank you, he said softly, so only the 2 of them could hear. It was my pleasure, your grace, James said with a smile. King's Landing 2 down to 98 AC. The Tyrion. He was fascinated by Shira and by everything about her. Just as the woman she was, instead of who she was, would have been enough for that. Even listening to a brief telling of her adventures in Essos had left him hungry for more. When you then added in she was over 100 years old, it really perked his interest, combined also with the fact of who she actually was. One of the great bastards, the lover to a man whose name still invoked fear and disquiet all these years after his death, only making him even more eager to know more about her. Yet for Tyrion all of that was actually just distant thoughts. She was his aunt, kin, family, and though he had difficulty at first coming to terms with the fact he had another family, he was each day becoming more and more glad of it. Sitting with her in the tent and speaking to her made the waiting bearable. It lessened his worries, and for that he was more than grateful also. "My lord, the princess arrives, and there's also a message from Lord Stark," Saddin said, handing him a note. He opened it quickly and smiled before handing it to Sherry, his aunt, reading it, and then before he could react, she jumped up and thrown her arms around him, Tyrion welcoming the hug. "Come, let's go and join my niece and nephew." Shaira said, and Tyrion nodded. They found Dany heading towards their tent, now with even more unsullied than she had arrived in King's Landing with. Strong Belwas and Sandor were both by her side also, and Tyrion was glad to see both men were unharmed, Shaira having explained to him just how much the Hound meant to his sister. As for the pit fighter, he had helped protect Dany, according to Shaira, and that was enough for Tyrion to feel gratitude towards the man. "Brother, aunt, come, our nephew awaits the city, is ours," Dany said, here smile beaming. "The city is safe?" Shaira asked. "We control the wildfire, aunt. Illyrio is dead and his men have deserted him. Some have asked to join me," Dany said proudly. Tyrion smirking at the look on his sister's face. "The mummer is awaiting judgment, but Jay wishes us to join him. When he addresses the people, he asks for his family to stand with him." It didn't surprise him in the least that Jaxley would wish to speak to the people. His nephew had an affinity with them that most kings never developed, and he had for years tried to make life better for them. Now that he was actually king, Tyrion had no doubt he'd resolved to see them treated far better than they had ever been before. Soon, with coin coming from the Golden Company accounts, he'd be able to pay for it also. "Well, brother, what are you waiting for?" Dany asked cheekily, Tyrion finding he was enjoying her moods and irreverent attitude innocently. "Lead the way, sister," he said, with a nod as she did just that. Riding into the city was a much different feeling than he had ever felt before. He was used to people staring at him, and yet, even though there was some, more seemed to stare at the two women who rode in front of him. With their silver hair and striking features, it was clear who they were, and as they rode through the city, Tyrion listened to the crowd. "Just like her mother. It's Queen Rhaella reborn. Hail to the Princess Daenerys. Long live House Targaryen." He felt himself choke up, though compared to Dany, he was a model of restraint, his sister openly crying tears of joy as she listened to the welcome they received. When they arrived at the Red Keep, it was to see a procession already being formed. Tyrion found that the smile on his nephew's face was all he could concentrate on. Jay was no longer wearing his armor. Instead, he was dressed in a black and red tunic, the three-headed dragon clearly displayed. He wore Dark Sister on his hip and the crown of the Conqueror on his head, and as they drew closer, he moved over to speak to them. "Uncle, aunts, I hate to do this to you, but we must ride now. The people need to see us, and night will be upon us soon. I need you all to reach out to your dragons, as when it's time they need to see them also," Jane said, and he nodded. "Your horse, your grace," he said, pointing behind him and laughing, when he heard Jay speak to Winter, even Dany giggling as he did so. "He really loves his horse," Dany said, whispering to him. "She's been with him almost from the moment he came to the rock," he said by way of explanation. In less than a few moments, they were riding through the streets again, Jay speaking to Dainty and making her laugh about something while Shaira looked at the buildings and people wistfully. Tyrion couldn't believe the size of the crowd that awaited them at the Septa-Richard, or maybe Jaime had done an excellent job of getting the word out and he felt nervous looking at the many faces that stared back at him. As he was helped off the horse, he watched as the Kingsguard took up position around them, and then they were escorted up the steps, the crowd hushing and the excitement palpable. At the top, the High Septon looked to Jay smiled, though Tyrion felt it a false one and knew he'd need to speak to his nephew about the faith. Jaxie motioned for them all to move forward at the same time, Tyrion standing next to Dainshie, while Jake stood in the middle with Shaira on the other side of Jake's. Dainshie looked anything other than a Targaryen princess. Truth be told, other than physically anyway. Her breeches and coat, a stark contrast to the elegant dress that Shiera wore. "Hail to the dragons!" Voices began to cry out until Jay raised his hand and stepped forward. "No doubt some of you have heard the tales, both true and false, about my mother and father. The lies that were spread by a usurper and a grasping falcon. In time I'll speak more, but suffice to say, any of you who've heard the hidden dragon know the truth of who I am and who my father and mother were. For those who don't, my name is Jaxley Hyrus Targaryen, the true-born son of Rhaegar and Lyanna Targaryen, and soon to be anointed the third of my name, King of the Andals, Rhaegar and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm." The cheers were deafening. Tyrion listened to chants of Dragon King and Hidden Dragon, or Rhaegar's heir and Princess Lyanna. "I am not the only dragon who needed to be hidden, not the only dragon who was unaware of who they truly were. My uncle Prince Tyrion Targaryen, the legitimized son of Jaime Lannister and my grandfather," Ye said, looking to him. Tyrion stepped forward to chants of Prince Tyron and felt a lump in his throat. He'd need to thank Richard, Jaime, or Jay for that. "My great-aunt Shiera Seastar," Jade said, and though there were some whispered hushes, there were cheers for Shiera, too. He looked to see Jay reach out his hand to Dany, his sister stepping forward nervously. "For 4 and 10 years, my aunt has had to hide from assassins sent by a usurper, a princess of House Targaryen, forced to hide and be away from her home. Never again will any Targaryen need fear for their lives or know they're not welcome in Westeros. Good men and women of King's Landing, Princess Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen has finally come home." Jay said, the cheers deafening now. "Princess Daenerys. Princess Daenerys. The dragons have returned." At the last cheer, Jay turned and gave them the nod, and then the dragons made their way to the sept. Jay wishing to show the world the full truth of that last bit. Tyrion watched as Dany stepped back, his sister obviously emotional, and when he reached his hand to hers, she took it happily. "Soon we will have a coronation and then a wedding. My betrothed will ride here with her family, and in front of you, the good people of King's Landing, Margaery Tyrell, will become my wife and queen. Good Queen Margaery. Hail to House Tyrell!" The Golden Rose and the Hidden Dragon. Tyrion was lost now on what was planted and what was the truth of the feelings of the crowd, and he supposed that was probably the point. If he didn't know, then neither would they, but they cheered it all the same. "The war is over, and it's time for us to allow the peace to settle. I promise each of you that each day I sit that throne, I'll work to make your lives better. I, my queen, my family, my council, we serve you, and unlike those who've come before me, my words carry the weight of my resolve. I swear it to you here in this blessed place. I swear it to you on my father and mother and those we've lost, and I swear it you on fire and blood. You, the people, matter, and I will everything in my power to see you safe, well and fed, and that the future you have is better than the past you've lived. Fire and blood. King Jaffrey the Just. The Dragon King?" The dragons timed their entrance perfectly, and the sky was filled with roars as Rhaenys, Lagaran, Elegon, Rhaegal, and Sandorix flew over the Septon, King's Landing itself. Tyrion looking to Jane, who stood with a determined look on his face, his nephew nodding to him as he turned and walked away. King's Landing, 2098 AC. "Arthur!" The room was just as he remembered it. Arthur brushed his hand on the weirwood table and smiled when he looked at the white book. The black oak table where Geralt would sit, the seats on the left where he'd sit facing Oswell and Jonathor. If he closed his eyes, he could see all 7 of them sitting there on the rare rations they did so. He could almost hear them still, Geralt's voice gruff and loud, Oswell's sarcastic comments, Lowen's laugh, and Jonathor's chiding. Leaving the memories to one side for now, he moved to the white book and began reading through the names. Prince Lewin Martell, who fought and died by his prince's side. Jonathor Darry, who died on the Trident protecting the heir to the throne. Seeing Oswald's, Gerald's, and his own name, and seeing the entry's end written so simply, he knew he'd need to speak to Barristan when he arrived. Oswald and Gerald deserved a more fitting end. They too had died protecting the heir to the throne, an heir who now had finally regained his family's throne. Turning from the room, he walked up the stairs and looked over to the small sleeping cells, a smile on his face as he moved to the one which had once been his own. When he heard the noise above him, it startled him, and he moved quickly to the Lord Commander's room. Finding the man moving things inside, when he got there, he drew Dawn and pointed it to his neck, the short man startled and dropping the items he had held in his hand. "Your name's Sir and your business here?" he asked simply and directly. "Sir Preston Greenfield, I was a King's Guard," the man stuttered. "Then you had better come with me, leave that, and remove your knife and sword. Gently, sir. I'd prefer not to spill blood in this place," Arthur said, and as the man did as he was bid as he finally noticed the sword. Arthur held, Who I am matters not, sir. What matters is that you move when I say you move. And if you do, then you may come out of this with your life." They walked down the stairs and across the courtyard, Arthur looking at the men of the 100 and feeling glad of their presence. He'd not trust the guards in the Red Keep, and Bon had been only too happy to put his men to use, along with men chosen by Jaime and Ned Stark, now making up a royal guard of sorts. Walking with the former King's Guard, for that was what he was now, no way would Arthur or Barristan let him keep his cloak. He found the Northmen near the Maiden Vault and handed the man over to them. "See, he's placed with the other prisoners, a decent cell, not the black ones," he said, and the Northman nodded, leaving Arthur standing there alone. With nothing much to do, he headed to Meckers to check up on the king's protection. He'd already done it more than once and had practically been sent to his room to sleep, though he found he could not. Whether it was excitement or fear, he couldn't tell. But he had no need of sleep, and so, as he walked through the halls, he found himself looking for potential weak spots. The tunnels were one, and they'd need to do something about them. The guards around the keep, another, though the 100 themselves were above reproach. He found Saul Richard and Saul Raziers on duty and wondered where Saul Rewalder was, asking his brothers and finding that he'd accompanied the king to the cellars. Jares and Richard had been left guarding the prince and princesses who had already gone to their beds. Hearing that Saul Razier, Prince Oberyn, and Jaime Lannister had gone with the king calmed him some, and so he turned and headed for the cellars himself, soon hearing the voices ahead of him as he walked down the stairs. Robert moved them down here when he was crowned. Some said it was because he hated the dragons so much, but I think truly he feared them. Jaime Lannister said, "He was right too." Jaxiaris answered, "Do you truly want them brought to the throne room, your grace?" Sir Bonifer asked. "My family and dragons are intertwined, Sir Bonifer. Now they've returned. We've returned. People should be made aware of it each and every day. Be it the dragons in the sky, the tapestries and portraits of the great good and even terrible, and these, the world should see us and see dragons and know what that means," Jackray said. Arthur found himself smiling. Rhaegar had said something similar to him once when he'd asked about the dragon skulls, waving off his concern that showing them off showed a vulnerability, that seeing the dragon skulls would suggest that dragons could be killed. That could perhaps put that idea in some people's heads that if real ones could, then those who were merely men could be also. "And when have people not thought this, Arthur?" Rhaegar asked. "My prince, did Duskendale happen because of dragon skulls or ambitious men? Did the Blackfires care that the remnants of what we lost were on display? Ambition, desire, greed, Arthur, 'tis all the same in the hearts of men, and whether they see our history or our present, it matters not when they come to take our future from us." He moved forward, and Oberyn was the first to notice him, the prince giving him a warm smile and bringing him into the conversation. "Arthur, what say you?" Oberyn asked. "I believe his grace has the right of it," he said, looking at the king, who nodded. "I thought I asked you to rest," the king asked, with a playful smile on his face. "Shouldn't you be doing that yourself, your grace?" he answered back to a chuckle from the king and those around him. "I find I cannot, Arthur, as apparently neither can you. Perhaps a spar would calm us both enough to sleep." "Your grace, we have a busy day on the morrow," Jaime said. "Very well, we'll keep it to an hour, Uncle Ser Bonifer," the king asked, a sparkle in his eyes as he did so. "You're lucky my girls are entertaining themselves elsewhere. Nephew, come, I'll even use a sword this time," Oberyn said, smiling. As they walked, he told them about Sir Preston, Hyene snorting when he called him a King's Guard, as apparently the man had turned on Renly Baratheon, who was being seen to by Grand Maester Gorman. The Stag Lord had been kept in one of the black cells, and though he'd only been there a number of days, it was long enough to do some damage to him and a boy he kept asking about, both of them suffering greatly from exposure and a lack of food and water. He looked to see the king still wore Dark Sister, Blackfire, nowhere to be seen, and he wondered if he'd ever wield that blade or stick to the thinner sword. A bastard sword wasn't hugely different to a long sword, but the balance of going from Dark Sister to it would be all wrong. It may never be a sword he'd wield as well as the blade of Aemon Visenya, No matter how skilled or talented you were sometimes, the blade almost picked you, just as Dawn had with him. Jaime, shall we? The king said once they reached an open space, his former brother smiling though he'd been reluctant only a little while earlier. Jaxley sparred against each of them, Sir Bonifer's smile the largest of any when he crossed blades with the king. Oberyn's laughter and the king's own ringing out across the yard when they crossed blades. When he'd first met the boy, he'd thought he had been the best of both his parents, a perfect mixture of Rhaegar's seriousness without his melancholy and Lyanna's joyful nature and spirit. Over the years, at times, he'd seen more elements of Rhaegar creep in, and one or two he'd have hoped not to. But where with Rhaegar it was the idea of what could be done, and knowing that he could not, which added to his melancholy. With Rhaegar, it was the fact that he could, which Arthur had trouble with. He didn't understand the powers the king was able to call upon, and they scared him, not that he feared what Jaehaerys would ever do with them. If ever a man was the right one to wield such power, then it was his king. More it was that he wondered what it took out of him, what it did to him, and would there be some far-off cost that none of them knew about. Warging he'd read up on, and what the books said, and what Jaehaerys could do was like night and day. The glass candles were beyond him, and something he couldn't even begin to understand. Add in seeing dragons in the sky once more, and it was almost too much for a man such as he to understand. For all the talk of magic, gods, destiny, and prophesied princes, Arthur was a simple man. What Jaehaerys could do was anything but, and at times it overwhelmed him. Are you just going to sit there with that sour look on your face, Arthur, or can Dawn be brought out to play? Jaxley, yes, said, smiling broadly. Now, my king, do you really wish to antagonize me before we spar? Remember, your crown doesn't save you a beating, he chuckled, as he drew Dawn and moved forward. This is your fault, Jaime, the king said, looking to Jaime Lannister, who was sitting there, laughing with Prince Oberyn, Bode, and Walder. What is your grace? Jaime asked innocently. I never had a big mouth until I met you, Jaxley said, to more laughs. As the sound of Dawn and Dark Sister rang around the empty yard, Arthur found himself laughing along, the smile on Jaehaerys' face, the japes he could hear behind him, all of it making him as happy as he had been in many a year. Later that night, as he lay in the bed in the room that had once been his, he felt something he'd not in years. He felt content. He'd played his part in placing Rhaegar's son, Lyanna's son, on the throne, a king who cared, a king with tools to ensure he stayed on the throne, and that his family was protected from any who'd seek to do them harm. Arthur would play his part too, and though there would always questions as his king had asked for, Arthur knew one thing to be true. His king was the right king at the right time, and Arthur's blade was his to the day he died. King's Landing 2098 AC. James Cyber. It was daunting, absolutely daunting. Hand to the king, the title was abstract, and the duties seemed so simple, or at least they had. Now sitting in the Tower of the Hand and looking down at the pin on his chest, a part of him just wished to run away. Grab the nearest ship and sail back to Casterly Rock to his wife and daughter. That his brother was sitting in front of him with a huge smirk on his face didn't make him feel any better. Are you going to bloody help me or not? He asked, showing his frustration clearly. I was thinking not, Tyrion said as he sipped the juice that had come with their morning meal. Tyrion, he said, his voice rising a little, his brother's laughter annoying him even more. Relax, brother, of course. I'll help, but you have this Jaime. Think, what do we need to do first? He sat there looking at his brother, who he was glad to see had at least stopped laughing. Tyrion looking at him encouragingly now, the city was secured. Sir Richard and Oberyn were ready to take up their new roles, and then he smiled. He was Hand, but he wasn't alone. There were others, and more soon to join them. A small council. We need to organize the small council. Set each master to their tasks, and we have to inform the realm. Marguerite and her family. Janna, Daisy, all of them. We need them here for the coronation, the wedding, the trials, he said. Indeed, of course Jaehaerys won't be the only one getting married. Have you ever been to Dorne, brother? Tyrion asked, his brother's smile a different sort now. Can I stop your marriage? Am I head of your house? Or is Jace? Jaime said and began to laugh at the look on Tyrion's face. Not funny, brother. See, now you know how it feels, brother, he said to a laugh from Tyrion. Very well, I'll concede that I deserve that. Where's Jurian? He asked, and saw the dark look come over his brother's face. He hasn't been himself since the Trident. Killing Edmure Tully, I don't think has been as soothing as he thought it would be. Cregan and he have been exploring the city. I think it's best we wait until he feels ready to come to us. Though should it go too long, Tyrion said, leaving the rest unsaid. Maybe Jay should speak to him? Give him a day or two. Yeme, Tyrion said, and he nodded. And you? What's your new family like? He asked, and though he didn't mean it to sound that way, even he noticed a bit of bite in his words. Jaxley, I know, forgive me, brother. Truly, though, what are they like? He asked, his voice much softer now. It's hard to explain, but she's a little closed off, a little more reserved. Don't get me wrong, she's made it clear she thinks me can, but I've seen her even with Jay. It's different than how she is with Dany. Maybe it's the newness of it. And Dany? He asked, seeing Tyrion smile. I have a sister. I know, but Cersei was never how she was with you when it came to me. Dany is, I feel, protective, Jaime. Seeing people look at her, I feel like stepping in and warning them. Tyrion said, and Jaime nodded as he closed his eyes, remembering that feeling all too well. And you like her? He asked a moment later. She's friendly, funny, spirited. Was she not my sister? I think I'd like her anyway. That she is. I like her brother. Very much so. Good, he said. Now, I have no idea what you're going to do with the rest of your day, but me, I've work to do. He heard Tyrion's laughter as he left the room, and Jaime began to write notes to be sent. A small council meeting, ravens to the realm, and positions to discuss with the king. He had a busy day's work ahead. After sending the notes to arrange the meeting, he found himself walking through the keep. 4 men of the 100 walked behind him, along with his own guards. The king finally getting the king's guard to sleep, and he knew they'd need to speak on a 7th member when Barristan arrived. That Jack hadn't sat the throne was something he was happy about. Barristan deserved to be here when he first did so. Knowing his former brother, he'd be upset he missed out on their sewer adventure, but guarding the future queen was just as important. Jack had shown already what the potential loss of Margaery would do to him and what he'd do to any who dared try to harm her. He passed by the steps to the cells below, wondering if Ned Stark was still down there. The man for some reason had gone to speak to Jon Arryn more than once. Perhaps they were offering each other condolences for Robert's loss. Though to Jaime it wasn't one. Sir Richard, he called out, seeing Sir Richard, Lonmouth, in the distance. Lord here, and the man called back, and Jaime grimaced. Was this it? Just like Jaxley's name would rarely be used anymore? No, in public, it was one thing. When he spoke in private, they'd use his damn name. He swore to himself. Jaime Richard, he said as he reached the man. I was just heading to the meeting, or to at least ready for it. I have some whispers I need to read, Richard said softly. Your network, Richard. Can you get word quicker than the Ravens? He asked. Aye, where? If it's Highgarden, I believe it won't be necessary. Our king's way of communicating works faster than even mine, he said with a smile. I thought he took the glass candle from her, he asked. Ghost, Richard said, and Jaime smirked. Aye, we all should be so lucky. I was thinking the Rock, my wife, can you get a message to her quicker than the Grandmaster? Aye, you have it? Richard asked, and Jaime handed him the note. Thanks, Richard. Any time, Lord Hand, 2 hours for the meeting? Aye. He continued walking with a spring in his step now. It would take almost a week for the Raven to arrive. If Richard was true to his word, then Daisy would have his message sooner, and by Pinnacle ship she'd be here within the moon, to see her and Joanna again. Gods, it felt like years rather than the few moons it had been since he'd left the Rock. He'd need to have the Tower of the Hand fitted out to make it suitable for them. Seems it was time to spend some of that Lannister gold on something he wanted for once, he thought as he began to whistle happily. Highgarden 2098 AC. Marjorie! It hadn't taken long for Highgarden to return to normal after the attack. The Dornish army that had surrendered had been marched back to Dorne. Her father organized his own forces to do so and left Garland in charge of their protection. After an interrogation led by Sir Barristan, the full details of what had happened became clear. Margan more annoyed and angry than worried upon finding out she was the only true target. Sir Saemon quickly telling Sir Barristan that they'd made up livery that would be close enough to their own, and after the parley he'd ridden behind Garland's army and joined with men they'd hidden nearby. Once they'd gained entry, their disguises had been enough to cause confusion and allow them the run of the keep, and were it not for Ghost and Fang and then Jane's arrival, who knows what would have happened. Since then, Sir Barristan had taken personal charge of the keep's defenses. The men now answered to him and him alone, and he'd set up a system using passwords that the closer they got to her family, the fewer people knew. Never again should livery be enough. My queen. If you do not personally know the man and he doesn't have the password, he will be taken and removed from your presence. Sir Barristan said firmly. Marjorie had to admit being guarded by the bold and by her brother did make her feel safer. True, each day she walked with Ghost, she felt free from worry and harm. Also, but the added layer of security did put her even more at ease. There were also the benefits of having her favorite brother with her also, and though he tried his best to remain the perfect focused Kingsguard, she did so delight in making him lose his composure, and for it to be Loras and not Sara Loras by her side. Really, this is how I'm to spend my day, he said, rolling his eyes. Really, now hold it up. You may be slighter smaller than Jag, but you're the closest to him. No, that won't do. I'll need to have this pulled in tighter, and this loosened. This she said, looking at the long coat. I look terrible in red and black, Loras said as he stood in front of the looking-glass. Prefer white, do you, brother? She japed, getting a smirk in return. Or green and gold, he said, looking at her dress. I'll be wearing red and black too often enough. Is that not so, Sir Barristan? She asked the knight who was standing by the door with a smirk on his face. It is your grace, though your own house colors will be acceptable also. They were standing there speaking when Ghost suddenly rose to his feet, Barristan and Loras standing stiffly, their hands going to their swords only for the white wolf to come over and lick her hand. Looking down, she saw his eyes, and the happy lick the wolf gave her once more. Told her whatever news he had to impart was good and not bad. She knelt down beside the wolf and looked into his eyes. The difference was remarkable, and yet to others they'd see Ghost only. Is it done? She asked, hopefully, seeing the wolf's head move to let her know it was all of it. King's Landing is yours? She saw both Barristan and Loras move closer to look at Ghost as he leaned forward and licked her face, the wolf's tongue tickling her nose, and though she laughed, she frowned too, wondering if that was Ghost or Jack himself. The guilty look on the wolf's face, all the answers she needed. Do you wish us to come? She asked, her heart racing as she did so. Ghost nodded, and she heard the gasp from Sir Barristan, and though she was excited and eager to share the news with her grandmother, Mother Saints and her brothers, she knew she'd need more to convince the bold who still looked doubtful. Are there ravens on the way? She asked, and the wolf moved his head, Marjorie smiling. We'll make ready to leave now, and they'll have arrived before we set off. I'll see you soon, she said happily, as Ghost licked her face once again. Standing up, she saw Loras' smile and Barristan looking at her in disbelief. The doubt wasn't there in terms of what news Ghost had shared. It was more the idea of her being able to speak to a wolf, it seemed, that caused the night issue. Jagstad showed me how it works with him. Sir Barristan taught me what to look for, and though it's taken some getting used to, I understand Ghost as much as I would you or Loras. King's Landing has fallen, and the war is won, and we must make ready to depart. As you heard, ravens are on the way, and they'll be here in a few days. But once they arrive, we leave, and I'll not delay until then, she said. Of course, your grace, Sir Barristan said. Loras, to please remove that outfit. It would be unseemly for you to speak to grandmother dressed so, she said, trying to hide her smile. But, you, Marge, he said, flustered. Gods, I forgot how easy you were to rile up, she said, her laughter loud as her brother glared at her. You're lucky you're a queen, Loras said, frustrated. Oi, I am. She found Willis and Sansa before she reached her grandmother's room, the two of them hurrying off in other directions once he told them. Sansa to begin to make ready her things to move, and Willis to make their preparations, knowing their grandmother would wish it done at breakneck speed. They'd need to send word to her father, and he'd need to travel from where he was, and either meet them on the way or in King's Landing itself. Reaching the door, Left nodded to her, and she walked into her grandmother's room. Grandmother, I have such wonderful news, she said as she took a seat, her grandmother looking at her expectantly. King's Landing 29T8 AC. Dany! The Unsullied had pledged to join her and Grey Worm, Dany. Not wondering what she was to do with them, it was something she'd not put much thought into, and now she found she needed to. She had coin. The wealth the Magisters had given her would help a lot, and there was also coin she and Sandor had gathered over the years. While she wasn't wealthy, she wasn't poor either. But in truth, she knew it wouldn't be enough. What was her role, she wondered, as they ate dinner that night, as a family? A family, her family. Her nephew, who was now a king, and her brother, who was a prince and soon to be consort in Dorne. Her aunt, who seemed oddly affected by being back in Westeros, and who Dany would wanly have turned to for advice. And she herself, who was lost. or at least seemed to be lost now that she had nothing to do. She'd come back to see her family safe, and in the end, wasn't even sure she had been needed or that she would be from here on in. "Dany, Dany," she heard Jay calling. "What? Sorry? I was miles away. I think that's the true curse of our family. We get lost in our heads far too much." Jaxley had a warm smile on his face. "Indeed," Tyrion said, smirking at Jay as he did so before rolling his eyes and making both she and Jay laugh. "In my defense, usually I'm not just in my own head," Jane said to more laughs. Dainsy having been amazed at the warging he did and what he was able to accomplish with it. "Fair enough, nephew," Tyrion said. "I was just saying that tomorrow we should go for a flight, all of us. I think the dragons would like it, and there are some things that I wish to say to you all. That is better said just between us." Juts is a bit too cryptically for her liking. "You speak of the prophecy," Shier said. "Aye, there's something I need to show you all regarding it." They ate their meal, and soon the topics turned to other things, to stories and tales of their lives to that point. Jay looking at her with pride as she told about sneaking into Illyrio's manse with Sandor and stealing the eggs, of traveling to Koho and then to Volantis, and meeting with Shiera, Missandei, and Grey Worm. Dany hearing of how they'd opened the mines at Castamere, of wind wheels, and finally the tale about his dragon and why she was different. "Rosierix is my sister, Dany. Not just my child. She's my sister too, had she lived Rhaenys. Would have hatched that egg, though it was always supposed to be ours, hers, and mine together. Something happened, something strange and wonderful, whether it was the gods, magic, or my sister's own will I know not. But Rhaenys is Rhaenys. Rhaenys is Rhaenys, and that's the best I can explain it." "But how? You hear her?" she asked. "I've seen her, walked with her, and held her hand. I've seen my father and mother, my brother and his mother. I've seen your mother, Dany, Viserys, too," he said, and she looked at him as if he was mad, looking to Shiera to see that her aunt wasn't looking at him the same way. "You can't, surely, aunt," she said confusedly. "You're a greenseer?" Shiera said with a smile. "More, I'm the first greenseer with dragon dreams since Daenerys, I believe." Jay said. She listened in wonder as he told her about what he'd learned, and then eagerly when he said she could see the past, too, with the glass candles. "I could see my mother," she asked hopefully, her eyes watering as she did so. "Aye, it requires a lot of blood to see the past, but I've done it, so I can show it to you. We'll need to let the Jaime Lannister bleed us. This is starting to become a nuisance." Jack said, holding up his hand, the large cut on his palm barely healed. "How long have you been doing that?" "Gods, haven't you people heard of leeches?" Shiera said. Annoyedly, Jairus looking abashed, which made her giggle. "I had assumed a crown left me immune to being talked down to. I'm glad it has not." Jay smirked. As she left to go to her room that night, Jay stopped her and told her about their uncle. How he was coming soon to see them, but if she felt comfortable, could she and Tyrion perhaps fly to the Wall and bring him back sooner? The ship would take some time, and the dragons could do so far more quickly. The idea of more kin filled her with excitement, and almost before he'd asked her to, she was suggesting she'd do it herself. She slept well that night and was woken early by Shiera, Jao eager for them to set off. The large procession that rode to the dragon pit was full of guards, Kingsguard, Unsullied, Sandor, and strong Belwas and men of the 100 whose leader gasped when he saw her. "Forgive me, princess, you look so very much like her," Sir Bonifer said. "Who's there?" she asked. "Your mother, princess, the Queen Rhaella," the knight said reverently. "You knew her, Sire Bonifer?" she asked curiously. "Very well, princess, perhaps when you have time you'd let an old man tell you some tales of her," he asked, his voice soft and his eyes eager. "I'd enjoy that very much, sir." Arriving at the dragon pit, they were soon joined by the dragons. Jax looking around with a frown on his face, and she felt the same way as her nephew did. This was not a place for dragons to make their lair. Elegon, though, seemed so pleased to see her, and Dany couldn't help but shake her head as she looked to see the others, all speaking to their dragons, almost exactly like she was. All but Sandorix had a rider speaking to him, and it pained her to see her son all alone, though he looked happy too. Flying over the city with 4 dragons by her side was something she'd remember forever. The sheer joy she could feel from Elegon beneath her and from Rhaegar and Sandorix to either side. She did look jealously again at the saddles her brother and nephew sat on and resolved to ask Ye if they could be made for her. And Shira also. When she saw Dragonstone come into view, she felt Elegon's excitement even more. And the trills the dragons made as they flew over the cliffs were as loud as any roars. They landed on the beach, and she spoke to the dragons, and then to those who came to greet them. Dany smiling to see Owain, and then hugging Missy when she saw her. "You are unharmed, Dany," Missy asked. "I am. You are well?" she asked, and Missy nodded. "I like it here," Missy said, smiling, as Dany looked to see Jack speak to Melisandre and to some men of the Company of the Rose, Dany looking on embarrassed as she realized she'd not given Jay the letter from Torrhen Snow. She felt it even more acutely when her nephew made fun of her forgetfulness, only to make her laugh when he said at least she didn't think Tyrion was her uncle. When he asked for a moment alone, she looked at him nervously, wondering what he was going to say and unaware he was about to give her a purpose for being here. Dragonstone, King's Landing, 288 AC. Jaxis Targaryen. If he had thought winning the throne was the hardest thing he'd have needed to do, then the last few days would have proved him wrong. Their first order of business was to deal with the wildfire, though the solution was one he'd been surprised at the simplicity of. Sand, they'd filled barrels of sand and emptied the wildfire inside. Hundreds, thousands it would take to rid the city of it all, and they'd spend moons doing so. But once it was done, then moving it would be far easier and safer than trying to carry a jar of the green liquid as it was. Then there had been appointments and council meetings to be arranged, meetings with lords, and though he'd put off most, he knew they'd be needed to be attended to soon. He'd let Jaime have one to set things moving, and he knew he needed and should be there. But this was much more important. Family had to come first. As much as a king was beholden to the realm, and as much as he cared for the people in that realm, he had so little family left, and he needed them safe and protected. Sir Bonifer had been more than happy to take that duty upon himself. The 100 had a new purpose, and once he was crowned, they'd swear their oaths to House Targaryen above all others, a royal guard of 100 knights, never more, never less. These men would be different than the king's guard, but just as important, and were only the first step in what he had planned. For the first time in its history, the crown would have a standing army, its allegiance to them and to their house. Never again would his house rely on vassals alone. Most of that, though, was for another day, and today's work was much more personal. Firstly, flying with Rhaenys and feeling his sister's joy at the others she flew with. "They're different, Jay, but they are us too," she said as they flew over Dragonstone. "We will need them, sister, in the war to come and in the peace that follows. Our family will need them to be safe," he said. "We will be safe, little brother, you, me, them. We will be safe." His nights had been filled with that thought, more so than any other. Safety, protecting his family's future, his uncle, his aunts, his wife, and one day, his and their children. 1,000 eyes in one he had, and if he'd not used them to keep his family, his people safe, then what was the point of being given such a gift? Oh, he'd never become Bloodraven or do any of the things that man had done, but surely threats needed to be handled, and any who came with the wish to hurt his family would find themselves face to face with a dragon. Stopping Dany on the beach, he looked into his aunt's eyes. The things she had done, places she'd seen, the lengths she'd gone to, just to stay alive would have broken a lesser person. Yet she was happy, fun, kind, and caring. Viserys may have shared their family's so-called madness. Dany certainly did not. "Yea? You were born here, Dainty, on the night the greatest storm in memory hit. To Dainty, a storm-born princess of House Targaryen. My heir should I fall, I can think of no better person to hold our family's true home than you," he said, looking into her eyes. "Jace," she said, her voice breaking. "Daenerys Targaryen, I would name you Princess of Dragonstone," he said, and he saw her nod before she hugged him. Thank you, Jay. It's your home, Dany," he said softly in her ear. He held her hands as they walked towards the cave. Tyrion and Shera, looking at him, and then Dany, concern in their eyes when they saw her tears, only for her to shake her head. "Jake has named me Princess of Dragonstone. This will be my seat," she said happily. Tyrion smiled, and Shera nodded in approval, Jera then asking them to follow him into the caves and lighting the flame of the torch as he did so. "Is that dragon's glass?" Tyrion asked, picking up a piece of green glass, as Dany picked up a piece that was red. "It is, and we need it or we will in the years to come," he said as he led them to the drawings. "What is that?" Dany asked. "The Night King and the White Walkers, children of the forest and men. The prince that was promised will bring the dawn," Shera said, and Jaira was happy. She knew some of it. Kinvara has gone to speak to the free folk. One day, we'll need to look north and beyond the wall and face the true enemy. The first and last enemy, the Great War, is coming, and we, all of us, will be needed to see it won. Jane said, looking to the others. What? Tyrion asked. When? Dany added. I don't know, I know we have time, and the men we've sent to the wall will help. Details I don't have, Tyrion. The prophecy, some words, the belief of red priests, and my father and mother, and one more thing is what I do. He led them down the tunnel to the door, reaching into his pocket to take out the jar and seeing Shiera's smirk when he picked out the leech. He smeared it against the wall, the sound of it being crushed far louder and more disgusting in the quiet of the caves. When the door opened, he saw Tyrion and Dany step back, Shiera looking to him eagerly. I believe only our blood can cross the threshold. Don't be alarmed if it seems I'm lost. I've done this before, he said, stepping into the room. He was proved right a moment later as the others did the same. Shiera was first followed by Dany, with Tyrion stepping in last. Showing them the chests, he watched as Dany moved to one and Shiera the others. Different items being taken out, treasure, wealth, of that there was some, but he could see his aunt look at certain things with great interest. Magic knows magic, a voice in his head said loudly. He moved to the chest with the book and picked it up. The words of Dany's herself, the other half to a book he had back at Casterly Rock. In it, he felt, were answers to questions he hadn't even begun to ask. This belonged to Dany's, her words, signs and portensol. Jack said, and Tyrion gasped, almost brushing past Dany and Shiera to get to it. It was lost, people say. They found pages of it, but Tyrion stopped talking as he flicked through the pages. This is intact. The words, they make no sense. Wait, except this. Yaxley looked at the page Tyrion held open, and then the words that were there. The drawing, though it was the drawing that took his attention. He reached under his tunic and found the pendant, and, as he looked at it and the drawing, as he then read the words, he began to smile. The blood of the dragon, he said softly. They gathered up some of the things, leaving most of the treasure behind. Shaeda grabbing a small chest and filling it with trinkets and gems, while Dany picked up a set of elaborate daggers that Jade hadn't even noticed. They were Valyrian steel and dragonbone, handled, and his aunt gazed lovingly at them. Tyrion picked up some books written in Valyrian, and Jay carried Dany's journal, the door closing behind them as they walked from the room. Flying back to King's Landing, Jay felt eager to see if he was right. It would take some time, but if Dainty left soon enough, then he could be here in a couple of weeks. Closing his eyes, he felt the dragon flying rider less ahead of them. Its own excitement was almost overwhelming. Soon he'd have a rider, and Jay felt the dragon would be only too willing to help. Not him, nor even Dainty, but Aemon, and he heard Sandorix's happy trill from even far back behind him, as the dragon felt and heard his rider's name for the first time. Old Town 29-8 AC. Jaqen, for almost 3 moons he had traveled to get here, and then for a further 3 he'd planned, taking up residence in a small room and waiting to see just how he'd get inside. Had he been aware of the death and disappearances of the men before he got here, then he'd have been able to come and go even more quickly. As it was, security within the Citadel had been tightened, and the men he needed to get to rarely left, except under guard. Even when he had taken a different face and became a guard himself, it had brought him no closer. And the many-faced god would only let him take one more to see his work done. The problem was, whose should he take? There were many to choose from, and yet, which one would get him to where he needed to be? Initially, he had made friends with the fat boy after finding out that he slept near the Archmasters themselves. Over time, he had come to like Samwell, though. Not that it would have been enough to stop him becoming a gift for the Red God. Though it had given him pause. Had he been certain that Samwell would lead him to finish his mission, then he'd have given him the gift, but he was not. And so he waited some more. When it came by accident. Or was it fate? Either way, he had been ready when the boy drunkenly staggered into the scribe's heart and had helped him into the Citadel itself. Though he'd been challenged, it was not greatly so, as Samwell's drunken state had served his purpose well. After helping put the boy to bed, Jackson quietly left the room and began to move through the darkness. Just one is all he needed, a face that would allow him to become someone who could come and go as they pleased. A face, though, wasn't all he needed. The face he chose must also have something more. Many links on their chain and an iron key. You helped me with these. a voice called, and Jaqen turned to look at the man, almost smiling to himself when he saw the chain he wore. "A man will help the master," he said, moving to him. Archmaester Rhaegar, now help me carry these books," the man said grumpily. "A man will do as the Archmaester demands," he said, lifting up the books. They walked in silence down a corridor, and then down another, before finally reaching an iron gate. Jackson watching on as the Archmaester reached into his robes and took out a chain with an iron key on it, and opened the gate before locking it behind them. Through another corridor they walked and reached another gate. Rhaegar stopped and opened this gate also, looking at him and seeming to decide something before bidding him follow. "You're from Lorath?" Rhaegar asked as they walked in the darkness. "A man was born there. Yet, you came to Westeros?" Rhaegar asked. "A man was searching for something," Jaqen said as they reached the desk and Rhaegar motioned for him to put the books down. "Did you find it?" Rhaegar asked. "Not yet," he moved quickly, the long thin knife piercing the brain through the ear, Jameson catching the man as he fell. By the time he laid him on the ground, the man was dead, and Jaqen knelt over him and said a prayer to the many-faced god, offering the death to him. Then he began to do his work and removed the face before he moved the body. Wearing a new face was different for each of them. Some simply took on the mannerisms and speech of the faces they wore. All took on their appearance. Some, though, became them somewhat. Their thoughts, their feelings, and who or what they were in life becoming who you were when you wore their face. While the extent of the man's knowledge would never be his, certain things were, and he knew how it wasn't just the iron key which had required the man's face. Jaqen happy he'd gone about his mission this way, even more so now. He now knew that there was a room where bodies were stored to be examined, and so it was to that room he took Rhaegar, and it was in there that he took his head before leaving. Looking to see the night was almost at an end, he made his way to the Archmaester's room and laid down in his bed, closing his eyes and sleeping in a face that wasn't his. He woke no more than a few hours later, and readied for the day ahead. After dressing and breaking his fast, he had no choice but to take the Maester's lessons. Mathematics and economics were the Archmaester's areas of expertise. Jaqen soon speaking on things that he had no knowledge of before, as if he'd been studying them all his life. "Rhaegar, have you eaten?" Ibros asked, and he shook his head. "No. What's the fare today?" he asked, and Ibros looked at him with a smirk. "Roast partridge, my friend. Peach pie, too. Come, I'm starved." By the time he actually got to begin to do what he had truly came here for, it was late in the afternoon. Rhaegar, it seemed, loved lectures and lessons, and filled his time with both, more than reading or expanding his knowledge during the day, that he seemingly left for the night. Still, when the time came, no one stopped him or questioned him as he walked through gates and opened doors before heading downstairs. Lighting a candle, he kept going down and finally found the locked vaults, a place he knew he'd be spending a lot of time in for the next few days. He opened the door to the first and walked inside. Books, artifacts, unpolished gems, nothing to interest him, and he began to wonder just how long it would take him to find what he'd come for. In the end, it took him almost a moon. The first few were in the same place, and he thought he'd end up lucky. That perhaps the many-faced god was guiding his hand, only to find out it was just some and not all, and not even the most important of them. For the next few weeks, his life became a routine. He'd sleep, hold classes, eat, and speak with the other Archmasters, and then once his duties were done, he'd come down here and begin his search. That his behavior raised suspicion was not surprising. It had been bound to, though he waved it away. "What is it you do down there, all the time?" Periston asked. The man wore an Archmaester's chain, and yet, even Jaqen wondered how he'd managed it. "I study their treatise down there on economics, which, though dated, offer insights that could be helpful." "This newfound interest of yours, what's brought it on, old friend?" Ibros asked. "I find myself eager for knowledge, insight, I know not why." Yaxanen said, shrugging his shoulders. "Mayhap we have another mage on our hands," Zerabolo said, causing the others to laugh, Jaqen joining in. "The day I turn into Marwyn is the day you should remove my chain," he said, and the laughs began anew. It was 3 days later when he found the 4 pages that he needed more than any other, putting them with the stack of other scrolls and papers he found. It took him almost 2 hours to secrete them on his person, and then he finally was ready to leave. Strolling through the corridors, he heard the heavy footsteps behind him and turned to see Sam running his way. Archmaester, you're dropped this. the boy said, holding a small scroll in his hand. "Aw, thank you, Sam." "You're welcome, Archmaester," the boy said as he handed him the scroll, a small, nervous smile on his face. "Later night reading, Sam?" he asked. "I'm trying to get another link, Archmaester." "Then let me not keep you. Good luck," he said, and Sam looked at him oddly before nodding and walking away. Jaqen only realizing later that it was him and not Rhaem who'd wished the boy well, and that the Archmaester never would have done so. Not that it mattered, as he was soon walking the streets of Old Town, and by the time he reached his room, he was wearing his own face, once more. He smiled at the innkeeper and made his way up the stairs and into his room, quickly dressing and placing the scrolls in a small leather satchel before taking his leave. As dawn rose, he was leaving Old Town itself, the ship taking him to Lannisport, and from there he'd make his way to see the prince, though perhaps by then he'd be a king already. He stood on the deck of the ship and watched the high tower fade from his view, a small smile on his face as he turned and walked to his cabin. A man's work was not yet done, and he had miles to go before he could go home. "Vayor Doharis," he said softly to the wind. "Iron Islands 208 AC. Victor Carrion Greyjoy." The Iron Victory sailed into Lordsport, and his anger still hadn't subsided. Less than 30 ships were all that remained. His niece and nephew were gone, and he presumed them dead, and his fleet had been decimated. Ships could be rebuilt, of course. It was the men that had been lost that he was angry about. Good men, hardy men, and men not easily replaced. There was no sign of the Cleft Jaw or any of his men. Few of his niece's true warriors had made it back, and none of his nephews. When he disembarked, it was to the inn he went rather than ride to the keep. He needed a good ale, and he needed to know more, and he needed both now. It was truly only the second that he got. The ale was pitiful, though he drank it down, and as he listened to the stories, it was clear he'd underestimated the size of their defeat. "They took her. She's alive, though. Where they brought her, I'd hazard to guess," he heard a voice call out. Victarion soon finding out they were speaking of Asha. Bloody Starks, no doubt. They already had one of Balon's children. Was that not enough for them? "Where did the wolves come from? I thought they were at war." "They're wolves. They hide and lay in wait and attack as a pack." He had enough and didn't need to learn anymore, and so he and the few remaining men that he trusted made their way from the tavern and began the ride to Pike to face his brothers. Knowing full well it was the crazy one who'd make more sense. Aeron may be mad, but he was not a fool, and it was clear now that Balon was. The ride gave him more time to think and wonder what to do, ponder on how to remove this stain from his name. Twice now he'd gone into battle against the Greenlanders, 3 times if he counted the ambush he'd planned for the Pinnacle ship. Each time he'd been roundly defeated, and all because he'd not done his own scouting. Had he known the size of the fleet Baratheon was able to gather, then he'd not have faced them at Fair Isle. Had he known of the reserves the North had, then he'd prevented this folly, this farce, and saved face and many lives in the process. By the time he reached the keep, he was spitting mad. His countenance removed any comments, and not even a hello did he get from the guards. As he stormed in to see his brothers, Aeron stood whispering to Balon, who sat the sea stone chair. Balon having the gall to glare at him angrily when he saw him. Hail our defeated Lord Captain, the man I've twice chosen to lead my fleet, and the man who's twice lost the battles I've planned so meticulously." Balon said, his voice dripping with contempt. Meticulously, and I thought him the crazy one," he shouted, pointing at Aeron. "I gave you the plans, the timing. The North is off fighting a war, and what have you brought me? The spoils of war, the trappings of victory, vengeance and justice to the usurper's dog? No, you've brought me less than I gave you and lost me, my children, in the process." Balon said, and was he not his brother and just his king, then he'd be dead where he sat. "Your folly, your foolishness has now cost us twice. Just like 9 years ago when it cost us a fleet, our dignity, and 2 of your sons. Why? Because you knew better. You had a plan, a vision, and where did that vision get us, brother? Oh, king of mine, where? The same place your vision got us this time. Fucked in the arse with not even a whore's payment for the privilege." He spat. "You dare speak to me that way, I am your king," Bod said, and Victarion laughed. King of fucking what? Our fleet was almost destroyed, brother. We lost most of our best men. And when the dragon takes his throne, where will he look next?" He moved closer and glared at Aeron, who seemed lost in prayer, and Balon, who looked back at him just as angrily. "We've attacked his kin, his home, and he either has my niece and nephew, or they're with the drowned god. Either way, he'll be looking here, and when they come, brother, and come they will, I wish you good fortune." He turned and walked away, hearing Balin shout and scream behind him, stripping him of rank and title, not that he cared. An Ironborn was only as powerful as the ships they controlled, and the ships would follow him and not Balin. He'd sent them to losses twice, and no Ironborn would follow him a third time. The drink at the inn was well received that night, and the men's spirits were high as he explained his plans. They were reavers, and it was time to reave, given what would soon be coming for them. Time was not something they had much of anyway. The dragon was a Stark and had connections to the west and the Reach, and soon the largest fleet in Westeros would be his to command. Robert had made a mistake and left Balon in charge. He doubted this Jon Snow or Jaime Targaryen would do the same. The Northmen would be eager to come and beat down the gates of Pike once more. He may as well enjoy himself for the few remaining moons or years he had left. "Captain! Captain!" he heard someone shout, his head thumping as he lay in his bed. "What is it?" he shouted back, his own voice hurting his head as he did so. "The king, Captain. The king is dead." He dressed quickly and found men waiting, horses ready to be ridden, and he knew then what he'd heard had been true. Riding hard to the keep, he saw the group of men below it and his brother standing among them. Victarion jumped off his horse and ran towards them, seeing the body. When he got there, he fell from the bridge. "Lord Captain," one of the men said, and Victarion shook his head. "There was a storm last night. The winds were heavy," another man said. "The king is dead. It's time to pick a new king," Aaron said, looking to him. Victarion looked at the body of his brother. Did he jump? Would Balin kill himself? Had someone pushed him, murdered him? He didn't know, but he knew his brother hadn't fallen, and in the end it mattered not. Balin was dead, and with him gone, perhaps there was a chance. Peace, it would need to be peace with the Greenlanders, and only a king could grant them that. "Organize the Kingsmoot," he said, simply, turning away. "Bear Island 2998 AC. Araya." After the attack, they doubled their patrols, and then word had come for other keeps in the north. The Ironborn had been defeated and driven back to their shit pile of rocks. Erzea and Lyanna both loved saying that when Erzea wasn't around. Lyra didn't mind when they did, that Erzea was far stricter. Erzea thought, though, it was only because Lady Mage had left her in charge just before the war had started. Erzea would be the one encouraging them and laughing when they used rude words. Her favorite use of it had been when she'd snuck down to the dungeons to look at Theon Greyjoy. The cocky, self-assured grin he wore when he was in Winterfell was completely gone now, and though he'd recovered somewhat from his injuries, Lyra had told them that he'd never force himself on a girl again. It had taken Arya some time to find out what unmanned had meant, but she was certain if anyone deserved it, then Theon did. That and the jibes and insults she'd send his way when she and Lyanna snuck into the dungeons. At Winterfell, before Jon came to visit and Theon fell from grace, she'd had to endure insults from him, and so she felt it was only right. He received the same from her, especially after what he had tried to do that night. One of the benefits of being attacked was that her training and Lyanna's had changed since then. While they still did their archery and went hunting, they'd also begun to truly train with maces also. Arya had at first been upset not to use a sword. She'd seen how Jon and Loras had used theirs in Winterfell and wished so much to be like them. But both Laura and Arya had convinced her that not only were neither adept, but she was a she-wolf of Bear Island now, something Arya was very proud of. So it had been a mace she was handed, and very soon Arya had found the mace to be an easier weapon to get a handle on, something she was doing now. "Swing it with all you might. Or yeah, no, it doesn't matter if you miss the head, just make sure you hit something." "That's it, Lyanna." "Excellent." Lyra's voice shouted out as both she and Lyanna moved through the dummies, left and then right, low and high. While Lyanna was more purposeful in her steps, Arya added moves and spins to hers, something she'd seen Jon do when he fought. Elisarn encouraged her to develop her own style, telling her that she was a Stark and should fight like one. The first time she'd said it, Arya had taken it wrong, thinking that Axiane was telling her that she'd never be a Mormont like them. Something that was clearly put out of her head that evening when Axiane explained that it was her body she was speaking of. That other than Daisy, all the Mormont women took after their mother, and that Arya most likely would take after her own. Her body shape wouldn't allow her to fight as they did. So she'd redoubled her efforts, and now she fought like a Stark. Arya Stark of Winterfell and Bear Island, she thought to herself, smiling as she hit the last target. "Gods, you're slow," she heard Lyanna say. "I'm faster than you," she said back. No, you're not. I beat you, Lyanna said. I beat you yesterday. How about a race then, she said, only for Lyra to look at them both. Enough, or I'll make both of you clean the stables. Lyra said, and as always, it quickly shut them up. They weren't arguing. They never argued. She couldn't not with Lyanna. She and the littlest she-bear were the best of friends. They pushed each other, knew what to say to annoy each other, and to make each other laugh. When she woke up in the morning, she was guaranteed to see Lyanna before anyone else. Either she'd come to Ardia's room, or it would be the other way around. More than her training, the freedom she'd been allowed to do things that always got her in trouble at Winterfell. The studies she did, or how there was no scepter to annoy her. Lyanna was the best thing about living on Bear Island. She'd always made friends easily, the cook's daughter, some of the guards' children, and some of the orphans in Wintertown. Unlike Sansa, though she had never had a friend that she was with constantly, a friend that she could speak to about anything, not until she came here, and now she knew she couldn't live without that. After Lyra had finished scolding them for a fight that wasn't a fight, they were made head off to their studies. While at them, she heard the news that things had changed, and Arya found she'd be leaving Bear Island far sooner than she had expected. They'd been learning about the kings of winter and how her house had held the north for 8,000 years. The maester telling them how from the moment Roderick Stark had gifted them Bear Island, House Mormont had stood side by side with the Starks, never once breaking faith, something which made Lyanna just as proud as she was. They'd just begun to speak on House Mormont's history when it happened, the servant coming in and telling them that Alysanne wished to see them both. They looked at each other as they walked, both trying to remember what pranks they had done that may have been discovered. Neither able to remember doing one today, which, in of itself, was unusual. By the time they reached the Great Hall, they were equally nervous until they heard the happy sounds inside. Lyanna looking at her and then both of them rushing inside. Girls, come, we have news to share. Great news. Lyra said when she saw them. Arya, seeing the mug of ale in her hand and noticing the mugs in almost everyone else's. Come, girls, Alysanne said. They both moved eagerly to the chair where Lady Maika and now Atsian, in her absence, would hear petitions. Arya, seeing the large smile on Atsian's face, and knowing now without any doubt the news was good. We've received word on Mother and on your father and brother, first from Winterfell, and then from King's Landing. Alysanne said, confusing her. King's Landing? Why would they get news from King's Landing? Mother as well, Jari, Lyanna asked while Arya tried to figure it out. They are your father and brother too, as well as your cousin. Jon is my brother, she said, annoyed, and Alysanne chuckled. I meant your other cousin, the one with the wolf. Oh, Arya said, though she'd been told not to speak on Cregan. She had excitedly told about him one night, and hoped her father would forgive her. The North has won a great victory against the Knights of the Vale, Mother, and Jory, no doubt, played their part. As did your father, brother, and cousin, Arya, and they're all safe. I'm happy to say, Lyra said, moving toward them. Jon, she asked nervously, seeing Alysanne smile. It's over, Arya. They've taken King's Landing. The war is done, and soon we'll have a king to crown. Yaxley said. Asia, finding herself overjoyed with the news, even more so a moment later. That's not all. Tell her ally, Lyra said, swallowing the last drops of ale from her mug. I suppose I better add. You girls are going on a little trip. You're off to King's Landing to see a king crowned. Your brother requests your presence, Erosia, and where you go. I've no doubt my sister will follow, Alysanne said, smiling at Lyanna as she did so. Really? We're really going? She asked excitedly. Aye, as soon as the she-bear returns, both of you and Lyra, I'd join you, but Alysanne said, and Arya couldn't help herself. Lyanna too, by the looks of things, as they both hugged her, hearing her chuckle as she hugged them back. It took another week for the ship to arrive, Arya finding each day longer than the next, and when it finally came, she still wasn't ready. Instead, she had almost been forced to leave most of what she wished to bring behind. And were it not for Lyanna getting a servant to help her pack, she'd have been going with only one change of clothing. Alysanne went with them to the docks, and Arya felt herself frown when she saw Theon Greyjoy being brought on board, the Ironborn chained and limping badly. Why is he coming? She asked. He committed a crime against the crown, Arya, and the crown will punish him, Arya said. I thought he committed it against our island, she said to a warm smile from Alysanne. He committed it against the king's sister. I think your brother would be less than pleased if he didn't get to deal with it himself, Lyra said. And Arya nodded, wondering then what Jon would do to him. Now you girls, be careful. Stick together and try not to get into too much mischief. Let them not say we raise savages on Bear Island. Both of you act as the warrior ladies I know you are. Atsley said, and one after another they hugged her. Arya first and then Lyanna. And finally Lyra. Thank you, Lady Achian, for everything, she said, and felt the woman muss her hair. Go, sail away and leave me all alone. I'll see you all on your return. As sad as she was looking at Bear Island as it faded from view, Arya felt happy that she was traveling. She'd see Father soon, and Robb, Sansa, and Cregan, and she'd soon see Jon. Looking down at the Nymeria, who lay snoozing on the deck, she looked forward to the pack being together once more. Riverlands 2098 AC. Cat. Each day she'd hidden in this god-awful place, the news had come, and it had gotten worse and worse. That her home had fallen hadn't been a surprise. And she took comfort that she and Edmure had been far away from it when it did. She had then put her faith in the Knights of the Vale, only to find that they too had fallen. And though word hadn't reached her of Edmure, she feared the worst. Something which inevitably happened. That Paedier knew about it, and didn't tell her bothered her. His answers not ringing true this time. I didn't wish to upset you any more than you already were, my love, he said, his eyes full of concern. I'm a grown woman, Petter. I understand the nature of the predicament we're in. I don't wish to be kept in the dark. Forgive me, Cat. I had thought I was doing what was right. I'll not keep anything from you again, he said, looking at her with a soft smile. I can't bear it, Petty, not from you. It was keeping secrets from me which caused this, she said, and he nodded. It was true, too. Had Ned not kept it from her then, she'd have never ended up hiding out in a brothel on lands that used to be controlled by her family, lands that surely would never be again. Yet, while he'd said he'd understood and he'd not do so again, Cat wasn't sure she believed him. Whether that was due to the nature of Ned's duplicity or to something else she didn't know, but she had taken to sneaking around and trying to find things out on her own. She had felt both relieved and shocked by his plan when he had brought it to her. Essos, she couldn't go to Essos, not even temporarily, and certainly not for an extended period of time. Yes, she wished to keep her head, but if she could get to Ned, if she begged him for their children's sake, surely he'd not see the worst happen to her. Though the little voice at the back of her head screamed that he already had, he'd seen her family brought low and had not been content with just his shaming of her. They had just reached the Crossroads Inn when the rest of the news came, and the reason for their haste and hurried departure from the brothel became even more clear. Robert Baratheon was dead, beaten in single combat by the bastard, and then executed by the sword of the morning. Cat finding her breathing ever more difficult upon hearing about Sir Ather Dayne. Everything had been a lie, everything. Ned Brandon, the bastard, what had happened in Dorne, the rebellion, her life, all of it, a lie that she'd been unaware of. What do you mean, dragons? She heard Petter say, and she shook her head, her thoughts having obviously made her mishear. 2 of them, my lord. One at the Trident flew by the prince, and one at the God's Eye flew by the king. The barkeep said, and Cat glared at the man for speaking such nonsense. They rode on and didn't stay in the inn that night, instead laying in the undergrowth. Cat was annoyed and upset, and in no mood when Patter began to remove her clothing. Still, she let him have his way with her, though she took very little pleasure in the act. She'd not since they'd been married, and even less so this night. Her mind was filled with fear and concern, and even was it not, Patter didn't stir her heart how it once had been. For all the things she blamed on Ned now, the lies and secrets he'd kept hidden from her, the shame he'd brought on her, and how he'd made her feel, he still compared far more favorably to her new husband when it came to matters of the flesh. The pleasure he had brought her a stark contrast to the nothingness she felt with Patter. Why that was... She couldn't be certain. Was it Patter himself, or was there a part of her that had been broken by Ned and his bastard? A part of her she'd lost that she'd never get back. She couldn't be sure, and so most nights with Patter were a mummery, an act and one he fell for completely. Tonight there had been none, and she was unsurprised to find he cared not either way. Rolling over on the ground, she felt her eyes closing, and she hoped her sleep would be a dreamless one, something that was becoming ever rarer. She was running through the woods, the howls of the wolves closing in and her hands and feet hurting from where she'd fallen, and dragged herself along the ground. Her dress was ripped from the branches, and her face marked from the thorns of the bushes she'd hid in when the wolves had gotten too close. Breathing deep breaths, she looked around trying to find a way out of these woods, and then she saw them. The red eyes pierced her very soul. and when the clouds passed the moon, the white fur became clear to her. As fast as he could, she took off once more, and began to see the woods get a little more sparse, finally seeing an opening in front of her that she raced towards. When it landed, she screamed out, its white scales and deep purple eyes staring at her and daring her to leave the safety of the trees. Behind her, she could hear the wolves gaining ground, and so she turned and ran off in the only direction that was left to her. Soon the sounds were far behind her, and then she heard the birds, the caws louder than even the dragon's landing had been. She looked around to see hundreds of them, thousands perhaps, and heard it in her head. 1,000 eyes and one I have. You can never hide from me. The bastard's voice sending a shiver down her spine. She ran again, and then she felt it over her, and she looked up in horror, the dragon looking even bigger now. Its white scales reflecting in the moonlight, its wings an even deeper and more vibrant blue than her eyes. Feeling the wind from those wings, she tried to run only to fall to the ground, when she saw him on its back, his dark hair and gray eyes marking him out, and the look he gave her one that filled her with terror. "Please, I'm sorry, forgive me," she begged, looking up at him and then seeing him smile. "Dracarys," he said, and the dragon opened its mouth, Cat seeing the flames inside as they began to build. She woke up and ran to the nearby stream, her stomach emptying into it, and then moving down from where she was. She wiped her mouth and drank some of the cool water and threw some on her face. Cat, my love. What's wrong?" Pityr said, and she grabbed him tightly. The next morning, after breaking their fast, they rode on, and 2 days later, when she finally saw Wickenden, she felt some relief. They were on the ship a day later and sailing by that night, Cat feeling somewhat more relaxed on the ship than she had been on land. Though this too didn't last too long, as one night when she had been too scared to sleep, she ended up walking on the deck of the ship and found Pityr talking to one of his men. "I need her with me. She's the only thing that'll keep me alive," Pityr said. "That and her being your wife, my lord. Married life is not what I expected, I have to admit, but as long as she's with me, the dragon won't come. The fingers won't be safe, my lord. Ha, nowhere is safe from a man with a dragon, a king with one even less so," Pityr said. Cat snuck back down to her room and feigned sleep when he entered an hour or two later. By the time they reached the Drakkar fort, she'd spent more time pretending to sleep and going over things in her mind than she had actually sleeping. When they were together, she played the dutiful wife, and her mummery when he did his business with her was certainly something he appreciated. Pityr smiling more and more at her, and Cat learning which of them were true and which were not. They heard that the bastard had taken King's Landing and would soon be holding his coronation, that he and Lady Marguerite would soon be wed, and Cat felt those old feelings stir up once again. This time, though, she pushed them down, for it wasn't for once the bastard that was her greatest concern. Instead, that honor now fell to her husband. Words and phrases, small moments, things said and unsaid, all of it, preying on her mind. When she heard Lysa and Robin had died, she knew it for true then. The tales Jaime and Lannister had told her, the song that Pityr hated hearing so much, and his own response to the news proving the lie as a truth. Cat soon wondering just exactly what else Pityr had lied about, and finding to her dismay that she was now sure he'd rarely told her a truth. "We will leave for Essos soon, my love," he said to her as she looked out the window of the Dragon fort one day. "We will?" she asked, a smile on her face, and she saw the glimmer of his true one once more. "Aye, some more arrangements to make, and once there we can plan for our return." "You have plans to deal with the king?" she asked. "Oh, my dear Cat, if you only knew the plans I have," he said, kissing her forehead and leaving the room. She needed to be away from him. That much was clear. But where to go and how to get there, these things she hadn't figured out as of yet. Pityr, though, was no savior, no hero who'd come to her rescue. So far from that was he that she was beginning to think him a villain, as responsible for her current state as much, if not more than she was, and that was not a man who had her best interests in heart. She saw it then, looking at her, the bird's eyes on hers, and she shuddered. 1,000 eyes in one, the voice said, and Cat began to cry as she realized how very trapped she was. Skirling past 2098 AC. Kinvara. They had ridden hard and yet found no other trouble on the road since Leif had left them, something both she and Val were happy about. Not that Kinvara ever truly felt in danger when she walked in her god's light. She knew her time would come eventually, and that her death was many years from now. She found she liked the free folk lady, for a lady she was, despite her rough edges. Had she been born south of the Wall, then Val would have been a lady that men would fight wars for, just like the prince's mother had been. Val loved hearing her tales, though she snorted and shook her head when she told them. Kinvara, well accustomed to those who were fascinated and those who pretended otherwise. Though it was the fire that really intrigued the woman, Val still seeming awestruck when Kinvara or her men showed off their gifts. She knew that here in this cold place, the mere idea of being able to set a fire with no spark was something that they'd give anything to be able to do, which meant that regardless of anything else, she had a power that would help her win them over. The next day, they were joined by a large group of men, a large man with a big belly and a white beard looking at them suspiciously and at Val with relief. Kinvara took in the man's appearance, and though he was dressed the same as the others, there were differences too. The golden bands that he wore on his arms would be worth a lot of coin, yet it was the writing on them she found most interesting. The old tongue, she'd hazard a guess. He wore ringmail, and when she saw how she was looking at him, he smiled broadly. "You look like you want to taste me cock," a booming voice called out. "For fuck's sake, Tormund, be bloody quiet for once. Where's Mance?" Val asked, and Tormund's smile faded. "With your sister, she's poorly, Val," Tormund said. "She is ill, perhaps I can help," Kinvara said. "She's with child," Val said, looking to her, hopefully. "Lead the way, and I'll do my god's bidding." "Val! Val! Who are these kneelers?" Tormund asked, glaring at her and her two guards. "It doesn't fucking matter. Come take us to Dala." "Joel! The others?" Tormund asked, and Val shook her head. The men with him soon surrounded them, and they were then led to a large tent, Val running from them when she heard the screams from inside. When Kinvara reached it, she looked to Tormund, who, for a moment, didn't seem to understand, before it dawned on him what she was asking. "Just you?" he said, and she nodded before entering the tent. Inside, a woman was in pain, laying on some furs with another woman leaning over her. A worried man with dark hair held her hand while Val looked back at her pleadingly. Moving the other woman out of the way and hearing Val say something to the man, Kinvara placed her hand on the woman's forehead before she did so to her belly, shaking her head when she felt it. "Val, what I need to do must be done, for your sister and her babe. It can't be stopped if you want them both to live." "Who are you, Val?" the man asked. "Trust me, Mance, she can help," Val said. So this was the king beyond the wall, Kinvara thought as she glanced at him briefly, realizing now that this woman was his wife and Val's sister, making her need to save her all the more pressing. "Don't stop me no matter what you see. Is that understood?" she said, looking to the man who looked at Val and then nodded. Cutting her hand, she rubbed the blood on Dala's stomach and placed her uncut hand on it before moving the cut hand to her ruby. She closed her eyes and prayed to Rosfor, feeling the flames on her fingers as they touched Dala's skin. She didn't listen to the shouts behind her and instead continued her prayer. Soon, seeing images of the woman dying, her babe dying, Vala screaming her pain and heartbreak out in the snow, and the king beyond the wall as a broken man walking alone on an ice-filled field. "Water, I need water," Kinvara said, and the other woman brought a mug of it towards her. Nodding to the woman, she let her tilt the mug back and drank it all down, shaking her head. When the woman went to take the mug away, she felt the fire inside her, and then she spit the water back into the mug, the water steaming now as if it had just been boiled. "Give it to her. You must drink it, all of it," she said, and Val looked to her sister and nodded vigorously. Dala did as she was bid and drank it all down, not needing the woman to move it away even once. When Kinvara saw the flame on her fingers rise up, the light go bright, she smiled and removed her hand. It was an hour later that the boy was born, his cries echoing in the tent, and after handing him to his mother, she watched as Dala's color came back to her face. "The Lord wills you both a long life," she said, looking to Dakle and seeing Val's smile when she looked back to her. "Who? Vala, who is this woman?" Mance asked as he touched his fingers to his son's head and kissed his wife before looking back to her. "This is Kinvara, a priestess of the Lord of Light. She's been sent to help," Val said. "By who her god?" Mance asked doubtfully. "No, by my prince, my god's chosen, and the man who wishes to save your people," she said, seeing the look of surprise on Mance's face. Beyond the wall, 2098 AC, Bloodraven. He looked on as Leaf moved, the men she faced no match for her. The two red warriors cut down as if they were nothing, and then he watched as the blonde wilding ran at her, only to see her stomach opened and her insides pour out onto the snow. The priestess ran and Brynden smiled. The red god had no power here. This was his side of the wall. And while he shared his domain with gods, soon even they would fall. When he saw her die, he felt relief. Things were back to normal and progressing once again how they should. The free folk would fall as much as they had to, and the balance would stay as it needed to be. He looked south and saw events play out just as he had expected. The war that was not a war only ever having one end. Then he found himself smiling for the first time in years. She was here, his love had returned, and soon he'd be able to do what needed to be done. He looked north and found them just where they had always been, watching, waiting, and soon they'd march truly. The course had been set and the die was cast. And though others would play the game, it would be he, in the end, who'd win. Closing his eyes, he went back down deep beneath the sea, his true plans needing to be hidden from those who'd try to interfere. Once again, he found himself swimming in the river, and the current took him back further than he had intended to go. No matter how many times he'd come here, he'd not been able to see that which he desired. Valeria's magic was still more powerful than his, and things were hidden even to a man who sees all. Dany's was one of these things. He could see her, hear her speak, and had heard the warning many a time, yet never could he see her truth. The book was a mystery to him. He'd see her writing in it, and yet never what was written, and it irked him to see so much, and yet so little. He left Valyria behind and found himself traveling upstream past the Conqueror, and the dance even past his younger self, and when the river became quicker and harder to swim in, he knew he was past the time he was in now. "No, my love, I'm fine." Jack Sears. "Are you? You look pale, Jack." "Magic requires sacrifice, and I always recover." "Is it necessary?" My love, it is. Come, we promised to have dinner with my aunt." "Should I wear this truly?" Margery said, picking up the pin. "I'm sure she'd love to see it again," Jack Sears said. He felt his excitement rise as he saw them, as he saw her and then her face and how quickly she moved. Brynden began to laugh. His eyes opened, and it was to see Leaf standing in front of him, the child looking up at him eagerly. "Did you see the prince?" Leaf asked. I saw him. Things in the south are happening. How we wish. The prince is soon to be a king," Brynden said, seeing the smile on the child's face. "Then he will come?" Leaf asked. "Soon it'll be time. Did you burn the bodies?" "I did. Magic knows magic, and I'd not let him get his hands on them." "Good. You have helped our prince greatly." Leaf taken care of a danger to him that he was unaware of. "I'll be sure to mention it when we meet him," he said, and saw Leaf smiling. Prideful as ever, these children, he thought. "I'll let the others know." Leaf said, and Brynden watched the child leave. He heard her tell them what she'd done, and that soon the prince would come, and so he closed his eyes once more. The free folk were as they were. The Night King soon would be ready to move. All the pieces were in place. All he had to do now was wait and be ready. Casterly Rock, 2098 AC. Cyrilla, her work was almost done, the papers written, and as she looked over them, she was stunned by just how much she had learned. There wasn't a person in this world, she felt, other than Jon himself, who knew as much about dragons as she. Few, she'd imagined, who knew as much about magic as she did, either. Though she missed having the dragons here, and the maesters who she'd come to think of fondly, it was Melisandre she wished to see again. Marwyn was an interesting man who'd helped her understand certain things, but his interest was more in her work than in speaking to her about his own, while the magical aspects of it were something Jon would allow her to share. Both Marwyn and Lomara were far more interested in the dragons, and on them she spoke only briefly. Melisandre, though, showed her things she'd found fascinating, things she didn't share with anyone else other than perhaps Jon. She explained how blood was the key to almost everything. When it came to magic, it was the source of power and the fuel that drove that power. Like a fire needed wood and a flame, magic needed blood. Melisandre had said it had made Cyrilla make certain leaps which she wasn't sure anyone else had. She had spent a lot of her time tracing bloodlines and looking at the magical aspects of them. When she had asked Jon about them, his own insights only added to her knowledge. Both sides of his bloodline were infused with so much magic that she wondered if that was why only he could fulfill the prophecy. Melisandre called him the Song of Ice and Fire, and that he was no doubt, but it wasn't just Stark and Targaryen blood he had in him. "My family married the Lord King's daughters, bringing their bloodline into our own. They say Brain the Builder married a child of the forest, and was the son of Brandon the Bloody Blade, himself a son of Garth Greenhand," Jon said. "You believe it?" she asked. "I know there is strong magic in my mother's blood, and through her mine, and in my father's also." Jon said. Those of Valyr were always said to possess magic blood, she said in agreement. And the 40 even more so, as they were the only ones who controlled dragons. Think about it, there are others out there who can claim a Valyrian ancestry, Sorella, and yet only those tied to my family could ever ride dragons. House Valyrian is a noble house, as old as mine own, and yet it's only through their ties with House Targaryen that they've even had dragon riders. You think the 40 is the reason? I think Valyria has secrets that none of us know, and maybe never will. I know magic knows magic, so maybe one day you or I will figure it out. But blood is the key of that, I'm certain. She had traced the bloodline as far as she could, paying great attention to House Targaryen and its many marriages, and had then made a startling discovery quite by accident, one she had only been able to because of the news from the war. They'd been eating one night when the note had been handed to Gaona, the lady letting Daisy and Ashera know of the victories at River Run, the Trident and the God's Eye, and that both their husbands were safe and well. Sorella seeing the same look on their faces as she had worn when she had been told of her father's victory in the Stormlands. Sorella, can you join us? Jaina asked. When the meal was done, she walked from the hall with Lady Daisy, Lady Jaina, and Lady Ashara, the former's belly swelling, and it would only be a moon or more until another babe was born. When they entered the Lady Solar, she saw more concern than she had expected, and wondered if she'd misheard the news, or if a mummery was being played out for the benefit of morale. Dragon Sorella, how does a bond work with them? Jaina asked, catching her by surprise. From what I can gather, my lady, only someone with the blood of House Targaryen can bond with a dragon, she said, confused as to why the lady would ask such a question. And how strong does this blood connection have to be? Could it be anyone with the blood of House Targaryen in them, or does it need to be direct? Ashara asked. Direct? She asked. Father to son? Jaina asked. I don't think it works quite like that. During the dance, there were, may I ask what your concerns are? My lady, I feel there is something you're not telling me. She listened as Jaina told her that apparently there was a boy claiming to be her cousin, a boy who'd been backed by the Golden Company, and she worried that he could take Jon or Tyrion's dragon from them. The woman fearing another dance, it seemed, and Sorella felt glad that she was able to reassure her. Once a dragon is bonded, my lady, only death releases it. Rhaegar is Tyrion's mount, and not even Jon could take him from him, nor could Tyrion take Rhaenys from Jon. So even if this so-called Aegon was actually who he claims to be, Ashara said, her tone leaving her in no doubt that the boy who claimed to be her cousin was anything but. Even then, my lady, she said, seeing them relax. It was later on that night when she was thinking on it more clearly that it hit her. The boy had to be a Blackfire, and as she looked at her tracing of Jon's line, she saw the shift. The split-off point between the Blackfires and Targaryens was more than just a breakup of a house, it was a breakup of the line. A change in it, and one which led her to another fact about magic she'd not realized until then. After the last dragon died, magic as the world knew it changed, and ever since then the world had been trying to right itself, none in the world more so than House Targaryen. While it was his appetites that no doubt were the biggest cause for how he acted, the unworthy may very well have been driven to it also. Sorella looking once again at the split and seeing the connections form. House Targaryen and House Blackwood were interchanged from this point on. First men and old Valyria trying to come together, and she began to see it not just as lust from an unworthy king, but magic-seeking magic, and it changed everything. While House Blackfire, too, formed from the unworthy's escapades, it was here the lines diverged. Sorella looking at the names and tracing them down to Jon, the current Jaehaerys Targaryen. Dachra to Maekir to Aegon. The unlikely who himself was married to Betha Blackwood, Aegon to Jaehaerys, Jaehaerys to Aerys, who married his sister Rhaegar to Rhaegar, who married Lyanna Stark, and finally to Jon, Jaehaerys Targaryen, the Song of Ice and Fire, she said as her fingers brushed the page. There was something here, something more planned at work, and she could see it almost clearly and yet felt there was something she was missing. For the next few days, she went over papers and looked through connections, and all along the way it was there, magic seeking out magic. When news came that the war was over and that they'd be heading to King's Landing, Sorella was eager for the trip, gathering up her papers and putting them with the rest of her things. She looked forward to speaking to Jon when she got there, to show him what she had found and to try and figure out just exactly what it all meant. What she knew for certain was there was whatever the reasons behind it. Jon Snow was the end result, and she felt it was something that he needed to know. Around the realm, 2098 AC. The Vale. Albert Stone. The goats were even more active tonight, moving around and refusing to be milked. Albert struggling to keep them calm. Even Patches, who was the most docile of them, had tried to kick him more than once. Why? He didn't know, though he feared a storm. The animals always got a little more jittery when they knew once was on its way. He dragged the next one over and finally calmed it down, the milk coming quickly as if she wished to be elsewhere, and all he could think of was that he was glad at least one of them was being helpful. The bleating he heard was so loud it made him fall off his log. Had he not moved quickly, he would have been kicked in the head. So eager was the goat he'd been milking to get away from him. Albert stumbled to his feet and looked over the small herd and saw them all bleat at Patches and move away from her as she stared them down. He moved over to see what was wrong and then hurried from the shed. The milking could wait until tomorrow, he said over and over to himself, as he practically ran to his home. Even sleeping that night, he couldn't get the sight from his mind. He'd never seen a goat with white eyes before, and he knew that Patch's eyes hadn't always been that color. The Riverlands. Hoster Blackwood. He was leaning against a tree, taking a piss, and then he felt it. The hairs on the back of his neck pricked, and he quickly finished and drew his sword. Though the battle was done and he had nothing to fear, something felt wrong, and as he moved away from the tree, he looked up to see the birds in the branches. To see a sparrow so brazen was a rare thing. The birds usually far warier when men were around. To see 4 or 5 of them sitting on the same branch staring down at him was something he'd never seen before. It spooked him and he felt a fool for it. His family were well known for the ravens they kept and their affinity with birds, and yet for some reason he felt nervous as he looked at the birds in the tree. He moved away and turned to head back to camp when the birds began to chirp all at once. The song they sang sounded pained to his ears, though, and when he turned to look back at them, he froze. There were more than a dozen there now, as if they'd been called together, and Hoster wondered why that was. He moved closer and looked up, and then as one they looked down at him. The birds' eyes were white, and he knew they'd been warged, but how anyone could warg so many at once was beyond him. As he looked at them, all of a sudden they took to the air, each of them flying off in a different direction. Hoster felt himself shiver and hurried back to the camp. It wasn't quite 1,000 eyes, but it was far more than 24, and he found himself wondering, not how it was done, but who had the power to do so. Though in 288 AC, Yayan. The night was cool, and she stood on the balcony, the moon high in the sky and its light bathing the city below in a unique hue. She loved nights like this, when the ideas and plots were less invasive on her thoughts, and when she could instead think of the future without worry. Worries for the daytime, for unpleasant nights, and she had worries aplenty. Tonight was for dreams, she thought with a smile. Dreams she had many, and none more pleasant than when she dreamt of her lion and wondered if he was off somewhere dreaming of her. She believed he was, hoped he was, and each day she woke, she prayed he'd be safe. It was an unusual situation for her and not one she'd imagined she'd ever be in. Love not something she had ever dared to dream about or ever thought she'd feel. Her thoughts were shaken from her by the sounds of hooves on the ground, the whinnies and neighs coming from the stables to her left. Dressing quickly, she called for her guards and found that there was nothing wrong, no danger, though something had spooked the horses. She asked them to take her to them as she was worried about her own steed and was soon standing in the stables. Whatever it was had seemed to pass, and as she stroked her horse's mane, she felt his pleasure as he leaned against her. After making sure there was nothing wrong, she turned to leave for her bed, and yet something forced her attention back to the horses behind her. Arianne turned to see one of them look at her, staring at her as if it was contemplating who she was and deciding her worth. It for a moment annoyed her, and then she was taken aback. Its eyes whiter than the moon she'd been admiring just earlier. It was only when falling to sleep that night she began to wonder, had the mare's eyes always been so white? Around the realm, 2098 AC. In the Wolfswood, the pack howled and the prey scattered, the sound unnatural and forced. The pack felt threatened, and yet she did not, her eyes looking forward and taking everything in. Seeing it all as if it was new, and as the pack ran, she knew she was not alone and would never be so again. He scurried through the cracks of the ship, sensing the food just ahead. The men above him were no longer a threat. He felt braver, no longer scared of them and their steel hands. When he saw it, he grabbed it and was gone in moments. Faster, cleverer, he felt different. It had hurt, and he had not known what to do at first. But the presence was comforting, and he had direction now. As he crawled back into the hole, he felt as young and could sense it on them too. Their eagerness and lack of fear was something he welcomed. She flew through the air and looked at the mountains below, the rocky shore ahead of her, and the trees off in the distance. Her eyesight had been fading, and yet now it was as it had been when she was young. Everything seeming more vibrant, and even the scent filling her senses once more. When she saw the prey below her, she dived and took it without any trouble, something that for days, weeks, or even moons she'd not been able to do. She'd lived on scraps and knew her time was nearing an end. An eagle who couldn't hunt was no use to the world, and it had been a long time since she'd been fast enough to do so. Yet once more she was what she had once been, an eagle supreme in the sky, her wings beating as if she was a hatchling, and her heart raced. When she landed, she ate the meat she had captured, fresh and juicy, and its taste invigorated her even more. She'd welcomed the presence as she had been in no fit state to fight it, and now she was glad she had done so. To the air she took once more, her destination far away, but she would fly to it, for this was a life, a second life, and she'd not squander the opportunity she'd been given. The Stepstones, 2098 AC. The Pirate King. It was done, finally. The moons of fighting brought to an end, and even though it had been mere days since he'd done so, he found himself bored yet again. He had reveled in the bloodletting and testing his mettle against weaker men than he. But then he was a god, and what fear a god have from mere men? Why he had come here, though, he had no idea, for hadn't been Valyria and Volantis that he had thought to go. Wasn't it Quart and its warlocks, and to Ashai and its shadowbinders he had meant to sail? Didn't he have work for them all? Or so he had thought. Yet as he sailed by the Stepstones, he had felt it in his head, the same voice he had felt all those years ago. Here he was to stay, and here he was to rule, and here to wait until it was time to sail home once more. It had been 9 years since he'd heard that voice, and he'd over time begun to question even himself about it, wondering whether it had been a dream or the madness like his brother had said. He knew the truth, though he had always known the truth. He was not mad. No, he was a god, and it was his destiny to rule these islands and then others, and finally, Westeros itself. Essos, too, would fall, and his name would be spoken in whispers from sea to sea. Wherever men had tongues to speak, they'd speak his name with fear in their hearts. They'd speak of the Pirate King of the Stepstones and call him by his true name only if he deigned it so. As the men celebrated, he drank the blue liquid and allowed the visions to overwhelm him once more, smiling as he saw the sea-stone chair and himself sitting on it with the driftwood crown upon his head. The first of many he'd wear in his life, the voice promised, and who was he to argue? "We sail on the morrow. Enjoy your night, for soon we'll have more blood to spill," he said, as he moved from his seat, the hall filled with men and women in various states of undress. Those who followed him would be greatly rewarded. And as for those who didn't, well, their heads decorated this very hall. Men who'd dare stand up to him and who'd called his vision madness. They'd spoken of dragons as if a god would fear such a thing, as if he couldn't just take one for himself should he desire. They set sail the next morning, 100 ships leaving the Stepstones behind, his crown laying on a table in a room full of the dead. He laughed as he stood on the deck, his blue eyes sparkling as the silence led the way. It would not be the last crown he wore, nor the last he discarded. He was destined for greatness. And while men needed kings and kings need crowns, Euron Greyjoy needed neither. For what use did a god have of anything? The Rose Road, 2098 AC. Lorziax. The last few days had been hectic, and he had found himself as busy as anyone, both with his duties as his sister's king's guard and with his preparations for the journey ahead. Seer Barristan and he had sparred every chance they got, and he'd even managed to beat Garland more than once, evidence of his improvement clear now for everyone to see. That his brother took it in good spirits also showed how much both of them had grown, as there had been a time when Garland would have sulked and Loras crowed. At first he'd felt annoyed to be left here while Jay flew off with Walder and Arthur. The idea that he was once again going to both miss the battle to come and not be by his king's side, something that he had trouble coming to terms with. He had missed the battle at the God's Eye, though seeing the aftermath of it, he wondered how much use he would have been there anyway. Then when they'd left to come to Highgarden and found the battle had begun, he'd felt a tremor of excitement, though he had to admit he was happy when Jay used Rhaenix to basically end it. The fight had been far too close to his home for his liking, and his worries for his family were too much to concentrate on, the battle itself. Later talking to Garland and finding out what had happened in his home, what had almost happened to his family, Loras felt somewhat different. Garland had confided that he had thought the end near, his brother telling him about the cavalry charge that Rames's flames had stopped. Hearing the worry in his brother's voice and the idea that he'd accepted he was to die was hard for him. Loras had reached out to place his hand on Garland's shoulder only to find himself grabbed in a hug, something he had never done so emotionally with his older brother before. Even after hearing of the attack on his family, and even though he wanted nothing more than to protect them and see them safe, when Jay asked him to walk with him, Loras had felt upset about being left behind. He wished to see action, to stand by Jay's side and raise his sword to keep him safe, to see this war won as quickly as possible, and yes, to see Saturn again. More than that, though, he was beginning to feel that compared to his brothers, his Kingsguard brothers, he was lesser in Jay's eyes, something his good brother soon removed any doubts he had that he was. Arthur, Walder, and I will be heading to deal with Dorne. I wish you and Ser Barristan to stay here, act as both Margaery's Kingsguard, and to keep my heart in its chest, where it belongs. Jake said as they walked in the gardens, the moon high in the sky casting its light down upon them. Your Grace, I could, he interrupted. Lors, it has to be you. Gods, if I could get him to stay, I'd leave Arthur here. But the similarity to my father would never allow him to agree. He'd not be able to, and I'd not force it upon him. Though, for me, this is that important. I'm asking you to do it because there is no one I'd trust. Margaery's safety too more. No one who'd put my mind at ease better than you. You're my brother, Loras, by choice, and now by marriage. If I can't rely on you, who can I rely on? Jon! Jaxley, Loras, I know it's difficult after everything we've been through, but I find myself hating the name I was given by my uncle, to share it with that man. Jax said, shaking his head, his face scrunched up. My mother and father named me, and that's the name I'd wish to be called. Jay, Lord Zieds, and saw him smile. I'll protect her with my life, my king. I know you will, just both of you, Ser Barristan, will be staying also. Don't take any chances, Loras, remember Ghost, Fang, if they show any worries or concerns, heed them. Marge knows this, and Sansa does also. So if they even growl at someone, then you keep them away from your family. Away from my wife. I will, Jay, you can count on me. Aye, I know that, and I do, brother, Jay said, hugging him. After Jay had left, Ser Barristan had spoken to him about their duties and of what it meant to be a Kingsguard. Ever since he'd been handed his white cloak, the pride of it and of knowing that, while it was true that his king was his friend, his brother, and that he had earned it, that men like the bold and the sword of the morning felt him worthy of it. Loras had felt pride in doing his duty, in serving his king and queen, and while he'd once heard people speak of the Kingsguard as glorified bodyguards, Ser Barristan had quickly set him right. The Kingsguard is more than that. They're a symbol, Loras, of their graces. The crown, the realm itself. His grace knows this, and more than any, he understands that it's who the knights are here. Barristan pointed to his heart. More than who they are here. He touched his sword. Or here, pointing to the rose on his armor. That's of the true importance. I don't understand, Sir. Surely they're skills. Of course a man must be skilled, the very best of them. But there are men out there who've been as skilled or more so than Kingsguard before, and I'm sure there are some now. Barristan said, though Loras doubted, other than Jaime and Jon, there weren't many as skilled as Barristan, and none close to Arthur. He looked at the knight, who seemed to be in deep contemplation, as if he was both searching for the right words, and at the same time remembering something fondly. His Grace told me his grandfather, despite his madness, had the greatest Kingsguard ever. I argued both out of a sense of modesty, and for other reasons. Mine own failures, and those of my brothers, are... Barristan trailed off. Sir? What? Sorry, forgive me. Where was I? Barristan said, shaking his head. The best Kingsguard ever, Loras said. Nah, that's right. Anyway, I argued with him, spelled out my reason, and the king just looked at me and smiled. He said Lewin and Jonathor gave their lives fighting by his father's side, that I stood side by side with him on the Trident, and that in Dorne Ser Gerald and Ser Oswald gave their lives protecting his son. Loras listened on eagerly as Barristan spoke. It was rare when he spoke of his former brother, so introspectively, speaking of them more in general terms. He'd speak of Ser Gerald's resoluteness and Oswald's biting wit, of Jonathor's steadfastness and Lewin's ability to bring humor to any situation. He'd, while in his company, barely mentioned their deaths. Though at times Loras felt the knight felt he should have been there with them, and it made Loras wonder what would have been the outcome of that fight if he had been. Arthur, you know he was on the verge of death, and all he cared about was our king. He was made an offer for his life and turned it down. Barristan said softly, regretfully, and Loras wondered, was he thinking of his own acceptance when Robert spared his life? As for Jaime, gods look at what he's done. We're here because he was the truest of us all. Lord said, smiling. He largely was here because of Jaime Lannister also. But the king looked at me and said something which had stuck with me. My grandfather was an evil man. Barristan, the king said, a truly evil man, and yet he had 7 of the greatest knights, greatest warriors who ever lived wear the white cloak for him. Did they fail at times? Aye, more than once. But in the end, they stayed true. Why? Loras looked at him, wondering if he was asking him the question, only to realize he was still relaying what Jade had said. They stayed, Barristan, because they believed in the future. Lewin, Jonathor, and yourself fought with my father for that future. Gerald, Oswald gave their lives fighting for that future, even after all was lost. Arthur Dayne was willing to die for that future, and only walks today because he was promised it would come to pass, and Jaime killed his king and suffered scorn for it. He took raised as a bastard and gave him a purpose because of it. My grandfather had the best Kingsguard ever, sir. Barristan, had he not, then I'd not be here to tell you so. That's what the king told me. Loras, and who am I to argue with the king? Barristan said with a small smile on his face. He looked down at his white cloak, pristine and ready to be donned. His armor shined and sparkling, his sword gleaming. Dressing, he readied for the day ahead and the journey to come. They were setting off today, and soon they'd be in King's Landing. He'd see his sister and good brother crowned and wed and take up his room in White Sword Tower. He smiled at that, the thoughts of them all being in the same space, and as he tied his cloak and walked from the room, he made an oath to himself. Jay may think his grandfather had the greatest Kingsguard ever, but he and his brothers would prove themselves even truer in time. It would be them, he said. Looking at Highgarden and wondering when and if he'd see it again, he found that he was far less upset than he had been any other time he'd left his home. He was going to be what he always wished to be, and serve a king and queen. He believed in completely. To be part of an order of men he respected, and he was going to see his love once more. His heart was full for the first time ever, both sides of who he was, finally in perfect balance. He was Loras Tyrell, Kingsguard, and he was in love with a man who loved him too. Loras smiled as he thought of Satan and being in his arms once more, of standing by Jay or Margaery's side in the Red Keep, and of sitting with his brothers and making japes and telling stories.